Welcome to the DevReady Podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today, we're joined by Chris Tran. Chris Tran is, he's a tech and financier, as we call it. He assists founders in raising capital and considering how they might raise capital, specifically in the East Asian markets. Chris, thank you for joining us. And just a bit of a two-throw. We met in a bit of an offsite with a startup we're working with out in Thailand. So back in October, I think it was. So yeah, Chris, thanks for joining us, and love to get your thoughts on the market and how you might assist founders in the journey of going into Southeast Asia. Chris.
Firstly, thank you very much, Anthony and Andrew, on having me at your show. And I'm delighted to be a part of the work that you're doing in supporting the founders and this wonderful journey, because it is really amazing the work that we have in founders that want to actually build something to solve a problem for today, to build a better tomorrow. So thank you for the work that you are doing at DevReady, and a privilege to be a part of it today. So in terms of the work that we do, we are based in Singapore, but we also have an office in India, and we cover all the countries in Southeast Asia. So we work with founders across Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, etc. And it comes up a lot in our work in terms of, where are the markets, and the important question of how do we navigate the markets. So in terms of, and it's nothing new, where are we in the markets? Well, we are up for a significant and multi-decade coming change, and there's just no two ways about it. We are at the end of an unprecedented set of circumstances which will never be repeated in history again. And I don't want to put too fine of a nuance on it. And it's across a lot of things which affect a founder and a founder's ability to raise, a founder's ability to actually execute strategy, which markets are available to him or her, and ultimately the exit. So let's peel that back. What does that all mean? Well,
there's quite a bit in that, yes.
Number one, what I don't see as enough reported facts, right, around what's happening in the world today. And, number one is that India is more populous than China now, right? Few people realize that. China, depending on any way you measure it, is the world's most dominant economy now. And things that people don't realize when, we go into Europe, or, for example, when we go into Australia, is that the largest trading partner of China is not the USA. It's actually Southeast Asia. And so there are these shifts that are happening, which I think should be thought about when a founder thinks about fundraising and growing and ultimately exit, right? So that's one. I talk about the geographical shift. The second is, no doubt, we're in the fourth, arguably even fifth industrial revolution. So we had this age of where, okay, great, it was Web 1.0, the internet, then it was Web 2.0, which was, one to many, great. Web 3.0, which was crypto, it's fine. We're into a world where we may no longer see unified platforms that we've been able to and standards that we've been able to enjoy. What do I mean by that? We've had a long time where it was fine and it was overall good for the world, where, okay, let's all go on Facebook, let's all connect, LinkedIn, whatever. You wouldn't ask a second question about it, right? But now when we have 5G coming into the fore, what is the operating system for mobile? And it's not necessarily going to be US-led only. And of course, what's really topic on mind is bringing this to everyone's attention is, of course, TikTok. So get ready for more discussions around what platforms are relevant. We will no longer have just single platforms being the domain and all you need to think about, right? And then third, I'd talk about the money flows. Now, it is well documented that when you talk about financial cities, that's been shaping up quite differently. What we've seen for the last 2 decades is there has been a move out of Switzerland, effectively, and Geneva, privacy banking laws. And, just over the last few weeks, we've seen UBS swallow Credit Suisse. Hong Kong is having some of its challenges of its own. Only this year, Singapore was ranked as, and it depends on what study you use, but Singapore was ranked as the 3rd global capital after only New York and London. And it's not just Chinese money in Singapore, but for example, in Singapore, we're getting a lot of Indian money coming through, a lot of family offices setting up. So when a founder is operating his or her business, there are a lot of things happening around the world that should affect their strategy and decision making. Happy to go into any other areas, but I'd start off with those comments.
Let's lean just a little bit on the why money's coming into Singapore. What do you see about that part of the world? Clearly, it's been a financial capital, but it is becoming a bit of a tech hub and where people are bringing their money to invest. Why do you see that? Is it more the protection, the tax? What does it look like for people coming in there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the biggest thing about it is the absolute, and there is issues, and Singapore is by no means perfect, but the absolute drive by the government and consistent drive by the government to make it a tech hub. Like, this is a government that gave 4 VCs a decade ago, something like a ridiculous 5-for-1 matching grant. I mean, can you imagine the Australian government going up to a VC and saying, hey, for every $1 you invest, I'm going to give you $6 to invest. And if you lose it, that's fine, because I want you to build Silicon Valley in Sydney or Melbourne. Like, I mean, unfortunately, never had that in Australia, right?
That's correct. And it probably won't happen anywhere else either. It's like an amazing scheme.
Correct. So, if we think about the true technology capitals, software, right? I mean, I'm not talking about hardware. I mean, Japan was, the last century, the hardware winner, right? But if we think about the technology capitals around China, the US, and Israel, all of them had a very strong geopolitical reason to invest in technology. But Singapore has actually decided to do technology to ensure that it's relevant in the 21st century. And I commend it. So, the ability to put the money where the mouth is, the ability to have things like Singapore Fintech Festival, which is the world's largest fintech festival, and they dump millions into that. They have a university program. There is a program, and I give credit to the Singapore University, where students are given money, and the course curriculum is invest our money into a startup, go onto the board and manage it. And I mean, just right.
That's insane.
Well, it's not just a paper shares on the computer somewhere. It's actually investing for real.
So Australia's got a lot of advantages, but I've been saying this for decades. I don't think Australia fully utilizes it. Australia has an amazing ecosystem where it is a good hunting ground for typically Western acquirers, the US, North America, and Europe, and also has a wonderful stock exchange which operates very well. And more or less, even though it's not perfect, it's got an investor base that can appreciate software and good quality technology companies, right? So I want to give a balanced view. It's not just like Singapore's got everything.
Yeah, no, got it. So I think it's just give people a bit of context of a different market. I think as most of our listeners are sitting here in Oz, they're probably not aware of what's going on around them, and it's so close to home, right? Singapore, Southeast Asia, it's really close. How do we start to engage in those markets? Everyone thinks, build something here, let's go straight to the US, but maybe that's not the first step. So I think there's a lot of context to this. On the platform front, you mentioned a little bit there about the change in the landscape around platforms, the Facebooks, etc. As we just had an announcement from the Australian government that they're banning TikTok on all devices in any government-owned device. Not across the whole of Australia, but government-owned device. That's a pretty big stance. What do you see from that perspective of the battle? It's like a Cold War going on around technology. What do you see in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see that the Cold War is going to be there for the operating systems, what I call the operating systems. I mean, when we got this whole change of the world, which happened when we had the iPhone, the operating system effectively was still US-led, right? And then it's going to be a question of, how long is it going to take before there might be a very different operating system on the phones that we have, right? I don't know when, but that will happen at some point in time. And so it's around the operating systems on our phone, and then it's on things that we don't see. I mean, that's what we see kind of B2C, right? But the things that I see B2B is, as the languages and protocols develop around IoT, right? And the communication between, like, how does all of that look, right? And we just have no idea. Well, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's in infancy stages, really, that sort of stuff. It's there, but it's not widespread enough. It's not commoditized enough to get to everyone, like you're probably talking about.
Correct. And I think one of the things that we've got to realize is the inconsistency of policy stance, right? That's very difficult for a founder to deal with. I mean, we do not know who will be elected in the US. Even we have the French president saying, well, you're back for now, but I don't know who's going to be the next person, right? And that's a challenge. I'm not attacking democracy. Democracy is wonderful. I mean, I've been lucky enough to grow up in a democracy, but you're having these questions around consistency of policy, right, in democracies right now, which is, again, tricky. If you had a purely kind of economic view, what I'd say is that you'd look at these models that were interoperable between platforms, because I can see a lot of people not wanting to pick sides. I mean, a lot of people just want to, build businesses, fix a problem, make life better. That's certainly one thing that I would consider. We see a lot of software players actually do really well in terms of kind of just making life easier in a more complex environment, right? So, in the good old days, you'd have clever, intelligent software programs around CRM and email. Now, the ones that we're seeing that are succeeding are ones that, for example, integrate WhatsApp, WeChat, Line, Naver. We're seeing it across HR, for example. So, this whole movement and just, some thoughts, right? We saw outsourcing. Now we're seeing insourcing. Now there's such a thing as friend sourcing, right? So disparate workforces. And, these aren't my client, disclaimer, but, good companies like Multiplier, right? So that's a company that allows you to have employment of record and have a workforce across 40 countries. I mean, these are the interesting ideas that we're seeing come out and get real traction.
Yeah, it makes the complex simpler, correct. Yeah, and that world's really opened up for everyone when you're trying to manage multiple workforce across different locations. You've got legalities behind that so they can solve a quick problem. Understand?
Did that really get a boost from COVID?
I would imagine.
Would that have taken a lot longer to get brought forward, do you think, Chris?
Absolutely. Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
It's just a huge accelerator.
Yeah, it's one of those businesses that, did they spin out during COVID or pre-COVID? Would you know?
I think it was pre-COVID, but they just got, an increase.
They got the exponential growth as a result of COVID. Just helped them along a little bit.
I mean, one of the areas I can tell you that we have so much potential, for example, is, can Australian education be more global, right? And quite frankly, the definition of global has been, it's global, you come to us.
And that's still, there's a bit of an announcement when was it, last week, I think it was, that the government's expanding out their immigration policy. They want 650,000 people to come into the country over the next 2 years in Oz. And effectively, most of those are going to be students, or at least half of them. They're still doing the same model, but the world's changed. So I would agree that thinking it has to change, even at a government policy perspective. How do they engage that offshore without bringing them in? But it's all about bringing more people in, increasing, we're at really low unemployment rates, so they need to really drive that up so it's not the cost of workforce is a problem. But it's a very interesting dynamic when the world's changing, but government still runs the same in my eyes.
With those platforms, you mentioned that we're sort of like the fourth or fifth revolution at the moment. Is the fourth one bringing those connected services together and then moving towards AI with the growth that everyone's seen over the last few months? Is that sort of the direction you see everything moving?
I see another direction as well. So the answer to that is yes. And I see another direction where, this kind of idea of democratization and decentralization go further. So if we look at Bitcoin, I know it's a dirty word, but the reality is that it had traction and potentially still has traction because it solved the need in the market, right?
It still does have traction.
People, you can't deny that people have lost trust in central banks. People want an alternative, right? And players want an alternative. Otherwise, it wouldn't have. Where we see is, to your point around platforms, yes, there are platforms which will do well, but what I would call enabling platforms or enabling technologies that allow people to create their own platform, right? Or to create hey, I want to do this and get to a coalition of people to do this, and I want it to be decentralized, and I'm going to use Web 3.0 to do it, and I'm going to incentivize actors on my own mini ecosystem. So, we see that, and
Okay.
it's kind of like, what happens if you take, the creator economy further, right? And what happens if you have, so that's what, that's what we see, the more enablement of the individual and the more around, are there technologies that help individuals or people, kind of create their own communities?
So a bit more towards, if you're looking at the crypto side, those decentralized autonomous organizations running, so there's more community group driven, deciding the rules and how things operate and bringing people together.
Yeah, because the wonderful thing about, developing a company in Australia is that, again, it is viewed as, if it comes to Australia, it's going to work, it's great. And there is an ability to export that technology, right? And multiple ways. I might just go sideways and touch upon something just in case it doesn't get lost. But, Indonesia, just to be clear, is the world's fourth largest country, right? That's right on our doorstep. I mean, just kind of like a reminder, right? And then, sometimes people have a misunderstanding of, and by working together and by really building bridges is the only way that we're going to move forward as humanity. People do not appreciate that Indonesia is a Muslim country and a peaceful democracy, right? So I just wanted to make that point. And then Vietnam is 100 million people. That Vietnam is not sneakers and T-shirts. It is mobile phones. It is electric cars. Just to be really clear. So that is going to be the next manufacturing story, right? And so the US is an amazing country, arguably history's most successful civilization. Quite rightly, founders should look at the US. Absolutely, there is good high spend there. But equally, are there opportunities beyond China called Vietnam, which is the next manufacturing hub? Are there other consumer markets such as Indonesia, which, by the way, has roughly a GDP per capita twice of that of India, right? That should be part of a consideration mindset, right?
There's a little bit to consider there, because I think in Oz, every founder is set up a product in Oz and then go straight to the US. That's the reality of what everyone talks about. How do we get to the US market? But it is a lot closer to deal with the world of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and really jumping into that. But it's a very different market, though. How do you, like, if you look at Oz compared to Southeast Asia, there's a big difference, I believe, in the way we operate, the culture. How do you break that down a little bit from a founder's perspective?
Yeah, Australia's like westernized, so you just lump America, England, New Zealand, Australia, like all very similar.
Correct.
You wouldn't think much difference between them.
So as a founder, how do I think about tapping into a different market, different culture, and taking a product from Oz into Southeast Asia? What's some of the considerations there?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, it depends on the type of business that you're running. So the reality is, if you're running a sort of B2C business where you're relying on high spend, maybe Southeast Asia is not it. It will be the next consumer story, but the spend is in the US. Okay, that makes sense. But for example, what if you're building some sort of manufacturing IoT technology and you're making no way with the Americans, right? I mean, they're sovereign. I mean, what if, for example, you were able to get some support from Singapore, go into Vietnam, get into a factory that, I'll tell you, Samsung, LG, right, are running. What if you were some sort of technology around quality control and procurement? And I'll tell you, we have this new conflict around chips, right? Chip manufacturing, Singapore, Malaysia. So courses for courses, but what I'd say is be open, ask what type of business, you have, and are there other opportunities which can either, be an alternate to the US or actually springboard you, right, to the US. And to be clear, I would like to name a couple of US VCs, which are in Singapore, by the way, which may or may not be that active in Australia as far as I know. So MassMutual is a global top 30 company, and its first non-US investment office is in Singapore. Right? Not in Sydney, not in London.
There's a reason for that, clearly.
Right?
Yes.
Sequoia, which is fabulous, and the one that looks after Asia Pac, right, is effectively a Singapore and India office. It's not being run out of Sydney, right? Yeah. So I think as a stepping stone and not just going straight to the US, Because the other problem too is you can go straight to the US, but if you go straight to the US with some of these players, they might just say, hey, actually talk to Singapore, right? So you might as well just, cover all your grounds.
So from a founder looking to crack into Singapore, what's some considerations? Do they work with a group like yourself? Do they just fly over there, get an understanding? You mentioned get support from Singapore. What does that mean, support from Singapore or Singaporean government?
Are there any schemes to bring in people with ideas or startups as well?
Yeah, there's a whole variety of schemes, but it's kind of like tail wag the dog, right? What I would do is think about my business, spend some time in Singapore, think about, does it make sense? I mean, it won't make sense to everybody, right? And then I'd really think about, well, okay, if it does make sense, of course, Australia has had, and I think still has, excellent schemes. I think there's still an export development marketing grant, right? That's available.
There is, yeah, there definitely is.
And a few other things. And let's be realistic. Yeah, okay, it's an 8-hour flight, but, it's not like that uncomfortable to get to Singapore, right? I mean, and you can escape to Bali and Phuket like all the Aussies do, which is wonderful. But, I think that, people should just come up. They should just investigate. They should talk to some of the VCs. They should get some advice. I think just, it just does not hurt to have that broader view, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Are you seeing sort of a trend in the vertical that the startups are getting funded through in Singapore? Or is it just across the board a variety?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I can even give you a background, and I think it's definitely different from Australia. I mean, what we saw, I guess, in the 2010s, the first half of the 2010s was a lot of e-commerce, a lot of B2C, and then to facilitate e-commerce broadly, we saw a lot of logistics, Uberization of trucks, ships, planes, that's still going on. Then a lot of fintech, digital banking, etc., move into the fray. What we're seeing now, and it's a byproduct of industrialization of these countries, is we're seeing local brands. Shine is a very successful Chinese brand. We're seeing successful localized Indonesian brands, Vietnamese brands. So we're seeing an evolution. We're seeing different type of businesses getting funded. We're seeing cultural Muslim, Islamic banking being financed, which is great. We're seeing micro-insurance, so insurance for a lower socioeconomic tier. One of the sad things I think about in Australia and the US is inequality is growing. So don't be surprised if these models, funnily enough, have more global application, because we are seeing more bottom of the pyramid, and, things are just getting harder for a lot more people. And also what we're seeing, which is catalyzed by the Ukraine war, is a lot of aquaculture, agriculture tech. So how do you more efficiently get that product from the farm? How do you use IoT, prawn fishing, normal fishing? That's happening in Indonesia as we speak. There are companies worth hundreds of millions. And at the end of the day, I think it's all goodness. We will need these solutions to make sure that we have sustainable and clean sources of food for everybody.
I think if the whole fishing market, I remember when I was first time in Thailand, they were just fishing off the back of a boat. So it's probably evolving over the time. It's just fascinating watching them with their nets and just crawling out, and just the probably the dad or the family little fishing boat, and brings it back into the island and probably sells it off at the markets. And that will evolve over time, but I think it's still relevant today. In terms of the whole business banking sort of blow up, the fintech component of what's been going on, fintech was large and it really got smacked, and the world of the buy now pay later world's got hit pretty heavily. What's the market look like in that space? Obviously, one of the things I see looking from the outside in is VCs generally, they might have a niche market they work in, and then they work to basically invest in, grow the opportunity, and look for bigger VCs to come in and actually invest. When the market dries up a little bit, you see valuations cut in half, cut in quarters, cut in to 1/10, etc. What does that market look like? Because Singapore was a big fintechy hub, but looking at more technology as a whole, given that it's got its banking background, what does it look like now in terms of Singapore? Is it just all tech, or is it still that fintech flavor?
Yeah, sure. There's still a very strong fintech element, and absolutely the whole buy now, pay later, really had some issues, of course, which Singapore wasn't immune. And then the other part of it, of course, as well, is the whole Web 3.0 crypto element, right? And definitely Singapore has lost some of the players to, interestingly enough, Dubai, right?
Okay.
But there are a lot of things in Singapore that are fintech related and related across. One clear example I can give you is, and everyone's got a different name, but one I call embedded vertical finance. So what I mean by that, you might be running, for example, a shipping company, and then or a supply chain business, and then you actually, can provide financing for the working capital of that inventory in transit, or you can provide insurance as well, right? Because you understand it. We see used car platforms, for example, Caro and Carsome, which are local here, have their own financing offering, and everything embedded within the vertical. So that's not going away anytime soon. The old school of where like a bank had to advertise on television to reach the customer. I mean, here it is, right? I mean, you are just going to these places when you're looking at your automobile usages, and the embedded finance is there. So that's not going away anytime soon. We see a proactive and pro-accommodative government stance, not just in Singapore, but across the region. I mean, you're talking about people having banking services for the first time ever, and the government is very happy for that and wants to know. In fact, one of the small benefits that people don't talk about is, for example, COVID in Indonesia. One of the reasons why it was a lot better than it could have been, and actually in India as well, is because India had this the world's greatest digital identity program, and I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, and I'm sorry to our mutual friend Deep, but ADCA, right? Which was biometric ID, bank accounts, 600 million people getting bank accounts like within 2 or 3 years, right? And thanks to that, during COVID, during the lockdown, people were able to actually get their money, and like that is stuff that we don't hear enough about, but we should, right? So long answer, my apologies, but yes, BNPL, crypto, but there's so much other to do around accessibility, vertical embedded finance. Yeah.
I think the accessibility is a key component of it. In the end, we've had little silos and big business operating a lot of these areas, and that's where it opens up. That embedded finance piece where you've got access on a platform and it's all there for you makes a lot of sense. It's rather than I need to go finance or think about this. It becomes another way that people can basically shop and have an option to. It is similar to a buy now, pay later scheme, but it's more of a B2B play and a different way to think about it. So I do see that as a market that will grow and evolve. The VCs at the moment, what's the market look like? Are they holding some gunpowder dry, or what are they doing at the moment? What's that sort of market from your mind? Is it still good startups are getting backed, or is it let's wait and see a little bit?
It's a bit half-half. So let's talk about stages, right? So we're still seeing a lot of activity in the early stage. And fortunately, that's because, 7 to 10 years away, we can wait, and we want to maintain the discipline of investing through cohorts and time cycles. So, that's good. If you're early seed, we're still seeing that. So that's great. But definitely in terms of when you're starting, and I'm going to talk US dollars now, when you're starting to look at, 15 million plus, and Series A, B, C, I mean, it's all called differently around the world, but effectively, if you're around your second or third fundraising with instos, everyone is saying that they are looking and waiting to deploy at the right opportunity. At least half of them are just playing chicken and waiting for someone to come out first.
Okay.
That's reality, right?
So let's say who's the riskier person to jump ahead, I guess.
And quite frankly, a lot of the VCs just are more worried about their existing portfolio and making sure that someone is actually funding the next round.
Yeah, okay.
There are a couple of things for founders. I mean, it might be different in Australia, but certainly we have a lot of founders that were spoiled by the last, 3 years in particular. And these founders are like, oh yeah, I better get to my VC. I better get to, giving them the information. It might be different in Australia, but the advice we're giving when we see founders is, look, if your VC isn't already contacting you about how you're going on runway, etc., it actually means that you're not their top of mind. So you better get them to be top of mind. They're not actually like most of the VCs I've had have already done the portfolio review around December, waited for the results come January, February, and worked out which of their bets that they would back. So if you're not talking to your VCs or they haven't talked to, like, you're in trouble.
Curse. Got it. Yep. So they've already looked at the portfolio, looked at the bit of traction that's popping through, and just, putting all our ducks on the ones that they think they're going to win. The rest of
and they'll double down.
I mean,
sunset.
Like, let's remind the founders, a VC is taking a bet on you and a whole bunch of others, and a VC is expecting, right, some failures, and there's no VC that is going to be able to provide all the resources to 100% of their portfolio. The end.
Yeah, fair point.
It doesn't happen that way.
So, Chris, why do you wake up in the morning? Well, I can see you're quite passionate. You're very well versed in the whole Southeast Asia. What do you get out of this space? What do you enjoy about it? Because you seem quite passionate. So I just want to dig in on you a little bit. We haven't had much about yourself, so I'd love to hear about yourself and what gets you up in the morning and why you're a part of this ecosystem.
Yeah, so the reasons are Linda, Aiden, and Zara. And so, as any Australian would know, or any parent around the world would know, children are expensive. So I've got to find some way to feeding them.
Got it.
But more beyond that, I mean, I am passionate because I see, this incredible cohort of people called the founder, right? And if you really think about it, on a risk-adjusted basis, they're making a backwards financial bet. Most of them give up really good jobs and more stability. Depending on jurisdiction, and particularly in Asia, they're fighting a lot of cultural difficulties, fear of failure, which I think Australia is a lot better at, right? I mean, fear of messing up, having to explain to your parents why you've left a stable job. And in Asia, it's worse, right? Particularly if your parents have like mortgaged everything to give you.
Yeah, to put you through education. Right. And got it.
And then third, if you are attacking a problem where there's vested interests, right? So I can give you, with our names, examples of logistics companies, for example, in Indonesia, which have had investors help out with the local mafia, right?
Well, okay.
Brilliant. So, names required there.
So, you're having the founders, which obviously they have multiple reasons, but at the end of the day, we need these people. Like, these are the people that are solving problems to make a better tomorrow for all of us, right? And, I just feel incredibly privileged to work with them. It hurts me to say, but yes, Deepak is one of them. But yeah.
In terms of why we put the DevReady podcast together, just to give you a bit of context, in 2019, this is pre-COVID, we had 5 founders come to us in the space of a week and effectively said that we've blown $1 million on product, their own money. One lady was about $500,000 of capital, still has fourth build, still had no product, nothing to show for it, no MVP, no anything. And we sort of said, okay, how do we just share stories? What's a better way to do this? There's no right or wrong way. It's difficult. The world of being a founder is challenging. You're going to run through many different problems. Delivering your technology could be one of those, or building a sound model, or even getting customers to actually get some traction is really another area that you need to be focusing on. But yeah, we started the DevReady podcast because we do appreciate that founders can take big risks. Some people have lost homes that have been on our podcast, and sad stories, but there's massive lessons to learn from that and how you might approach it next time. But in the end, it's a risk-reward game that everyone's playing. And we do enjoy the passion that people bring to the table and the problems they're trying to solve. I find that, I'll ask this question to you. What do you find, who are the ones that succeed in your mind? What are the criteria that you see that garner success? There's no right or wrong answer to that, but just what do you see that really puts a founder in good stead to go on a journey like this?
I haven't got any silver bullets here. One thing that
I wouldn't expect any, but yeah, is there any?
One of the things I hate to admit, luck.
Yes.
And I mean, I hate to talk about stuff that you can't control. But the founders that are successful, apart from having all the classical elements of hardworking, willing to listen, build the right team, all that kind of stuff. I see have either lucky or ability to find themselves in the right place at the right time and have the right exposure. And to identify shifts, right? Like, I mean, how many times have we seen a successful startup that was successful because there was a shift, or the converse, not successful because they didn't see it coming, right? Probably to answer your question, I would say be conscious of the shifts, try to be in the right place at the right time. And then second, by definition, if you're a startup, you're unprofitable. You've got no choice. You need to have a very investor-friendly capital strategy. There is no choice. Like, I mean, I hear some things from some professors, you've got a good business, it will be funded. No, man, I live in the real world, man. No, man, you need to be building something that people would fund. You need to survive, right? Because by definition, you are unprofitable. So you must have a capital strategy. You must have a proactive investment strategy. You got to know who's looking after your next round, etc. Man, full stop.
Yeah, so it's thinking forward on the whole capital component because, like you said, there's a runway and it dwindles pretty quickly. Likelihood you've got 12 months, 18 months max. In a perfect world, that's where it really sits.
And it takes a long time to close off those rounds.
And getting longer.
So you got to be planning early. Otherwise, your runway is just going to be burned out before you even get anywhere close.
And getting longer. And put your team in place to run the business, right? Because you are going to be the guy or girl that has to talk to the investors, that courts them, that sees them 6, 10, 15 times to get that check.
Yeah, it is an interesting
do what you can. Close the sale.
It's a sale to the VCs, and that's being around. Like from a founder's perspective, it's probably an interesting way to look at it. So a founder comes in generally because they want to solve big problems. Maybe they've got a concept, they've got some IP, potentially the domain expert, and they see an opportunity. But what I've noticed is if you're going to play the game of big VC and you need big capital to drive a scalable business, you end up becoming that person that fronts the VC conversations. You get sucked into a lot of that. How do you take the shift there, and how do you encourage founders to think about that? Or could they bring people into the team to support that, or a co-founder? What would you say around that area?
Or are the VCs more looking at investing in the co-founder, in the founder, than the business in the early stages?
Yeah, I'll answer that. So, look, if you're early, you've got no choice. It's got to be you. They're backing you, right? They're not backing your business. By the time, and I'll be as specific as I can be to be more useful to your audience, right? I would say by the time you're doing, say, 5 to 10 million a year, but if you're doing 5 and you've got a really sexy business with like high valuation, you should already be having a chief operating officer, some number 2 that runs your business. The VCs will be expecting to see you. But by that stage, you can then look at a CFO or someone else to help front up with the investor conversations, right? But it's still you. By the time that you have 5 to 10 and you're looking for the next check, you better make sure that at least 1 or 2 of the VCs on your cap table love you and are championing you and actually are saying, right? I'm going to be clear about my advice again. If you're a founder and you do not know yet and you do not have your VC reaching out to you as one of their favorite portfolios, get there quickly because you're going to be an orphan child, full stop, right? By the time your Series C, let's say maybe you've got, 10 to 15 in revenue, you're looking at profitability being, 18 months away, etc. You should just not nickel and dime. You should have a first-class CFO. You should have a investor relations function of some sort. You should be controlling the narrative in the markets. You should be looking at, if you sign up a big commercial deal, having PR. You should be on panels. You should be available to be seen. So that's some advice around proactively managing your capital strategy.
I think it's good advice because a lot of people go in, like I said, founders come in from the idea, the concept, the domain knowledge, domain expertise, and they sit in product or they sit in business and operation, and they maybe don't give a holistic view of what they're really in for, especially if you want to go big scale. There's different levels of business. If you're looking at proper startups, creating big value, looking at the top end, that's, one thing I've noticed in some founders that really don't get a grip on that, and it passes them by a little bit. So something that people can think about and take away from today.
Well, sadly, around every 6 weeks, I'm repeating this example, right? And I think, all of us are of the vintage to understand it, but there used to be this thing called VHS called Betatron, right? And it's not the best technology that wins. And like constantly having to tell founders, look, if you want to build the best technology and have a business around that, that's okay, but understand the game that you're in. The game that you're in is the best. It's not the best technology, but it's the best technology that finds the product market fit that's going to win. And that may not be as shiny of a toy that you want to build. And that's a difficult discussion with the founder. I get it. But if you're in the VC game, it's all around market traction, and that's it. And there are some sacrifices along the way, and there may be different people to drive your company, maybe a more commercially orientated one. So,
Chris, thanks for joining us on the DevReady Podcast. There's a lot of context and information that people think about, especially from Oz in the world of Southeast Asia and what the potentials might be. And I think if anyone's looking to go to the US, maybe consider Singapore. At least there's a bit of an education piece and going and have a look, because there is quite a bit of opportunity, and clearly the government's backing technology in that space. So thank you for joining us on DevReady Podcast. Anyone wants to learn about you and what you offer, where can they find you, Chris?
Sure. So the website CapConnect.asia. Also, I'm on LinkedIn, and be an absolute pleasure in seeing how I can serve your audience. Thank you so much for having me here.
I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. It's been great.